Hi everyone, I am Mahesh. In this video, we are going to discuss about arrays in Java. So let us take an example first. I have an integer variable a and it has some value 10. So I have two more variables b and c like this. And like this, I have so many variables, like maybe 100 variables I wanted. That's my requirement. So if you see here, it is like more difficult to remember the variable names, 100 variable names, and also the maintainability of code is also difficult, right? So what's the solution for this? If I wanted to have like 1000 variables, that becomes much more complex, right? So what is the solution for this, right? If you observe, in all these variables, the common thing is data type. So let me put it here, the data type as integer in this example. And what if I have some variable defined here which will represent all these variables, right? So this looks simpler, right? This is what we call it as an array. So let's define an array now. You can see it here, like this is a group, right? Group, or let's call this as a collection of these values or elements of similar data type is what we define it as an array. So let me put it here. Now any variable occupies some space in the memory, right? And that memory can come from some random memory location, right? And in the same way, array also occupies some space on the memory, and that memory is contiguous, meaning the elements of the array are allocated space in the memory contiguously, right? So this is a property of an array. And we have a big variable or huge variable of an array, right? Actually, we should not call this as an variable. This array is a non-primitive data type, so we should call array as an object, right? So we have an array object now, and we have different, we wanted to represent different values or different variables, right? How to do that? We can do that using the indexes, and index starts with 0. So index starts with 0 till the last element in that array. We have indexes, and using this indexes and this array object, we are going to store and access the values of the elements of this array. So let me put it here. So this is about the array properties. Array syntax. So the first part is we need to declare an array, right? So the first part is declaration part. How to declare an array? Let me write the syntax first. So we need to mention data type of the array and then the array name, followed by square braces, one open square bracket and followed by the close square bracket. This is the syntax of an array. Let's take an example now. So let's take the data type as we had in the same last example, integer data type, and my array name is, let's say for example, ARR followed by square brackets, right? This is the declaration part, and we can also declare this array in this way. Int, this square brackets can come before declaring the variable name, or we can also have the square brackets immediately after specifying the data type. This is also the valid syntax for declaring an array. Now let us see the instantiation part. How to instantiate an array? Instantiation. So what does instantiation means? We'll see that. First let me write the syntax for it. So I am taking the same example of this array. In ARR equal to new int of, let's say for example, I wanted to create an array with 5 elements. We need to mention that here. So what does this mean is, we are asking JVM to create an array first. So that part we mention here, and allocate memory for 5 elements which are of type integer. That is what we mean by this new keyword. So with this what happens is, memory for 5 elements of integer data type gets created in the gets allocated in the memory, right? And with the we know they are represented with the indexes, right? Like this. So this is the instantiation part. Next comes the initialization part. So we declared an array, we allocated space for it. Now we wanted to store some values into the array, right? That is initialization part. Initialization part. How to initialize values? I have array, right? Of index starts with 0. So in the 0th index, I wanted to store the value of 10. And in the next index, I wanted to store some other value, and so on. In the last index, I wanted to store some value like this. So this is how we can actually initialize the values to the array elements. And these are the 3 different steps, right? Declaring array, instantiating it, and initializing it. All these 3 can be done in single step. So let's see that now. Let me put it here. So I have integer array, this is the declaration part, and equal to, I can have the values mentioned here itself while declaring the array. So this takes care of declaration, automatically instantiated, and the values are initialized. And these values, remember, these values can be initialized only at the time of declaration of the array. So this 3 parts can be done in single step, like this: declaring part, instantiating, and initializing the array. So this is the syntax of an array. Now let's understand the length of the array. How to get the length of an array? So for example, I have an array like this: new int of 5 to store 5 values, integer values, right? So this is the array, right? Now I wanted to get the length of this array. So how to get the length of an array? Array, we said it's an object, right? So it has its own data member called length. So using this length data member, we can get the length of the array. That is this number 5. We can get it using the length. And remember, the index always starts with 0 and ends with array length minus 1, as it is starting with 0. This is about the data member length of array object. Let me put it here. So using this, we can get the length of the array. And another important point here is, so what if I have if I specify the index like this? Say for example, this is fine, right? A of 0. If I wanted to modify this value to some 70, so fine, it will be modified and 70 will be stored in the 0th index, fine. Now what if I try to access the index which is not even present there? Like say for example, I try to access the index 6, but index 4 is the maximum index here in this array, and I assign some value here, right? So in this case, what happens is, we get an exception called, GVM throws an exception called array index out of bounds exception. So let me put it here. And even when we have the index less than 0 also, like if I try to access some index like this and assign some value, even in this case we get the same exception, array index out of bounds exception. So always the index should be between 0 and array length minus 1. Remember this. This is important. Now that we have a fair understanding of what an array is, let us discuss about the enhanced for loop. We already discussed about simple for loop and labeled for loop. In my previous videos, we have already discussed that. So in this video, we are going to discuss about enhanced for loop, as we have an understanding of arrays now. So let me write the syntax first. For data type, variable name, colon, here it can be an array or it can be a collection as well. We are going to discuss about collections in the coming videos. For now, just think it of as an array here, and here we can have body loop. We can have something written here inside the loop. So this is the syntax of the enhanced loop. Let us understand it now. So if I wanted to read an array, elements of the array, so that we need to mention it here. So we'll read this enhanced for loop from right to left. So we need to mention that array here, and then here we have a colon, and you can see here a data type of the elements which are present in this array. So that we need to mention it here, and each element, so starting from the index 0, will be read into this variable, and this variable can be used inside the loop, and this will continue till the last element in this array, that is the index with index specified with array dot length minus 1. So that will be the last index, right? Till that point, so each element value will be stored in this variable and can be used in this loop, and in the next iteration, so we will get the next index values, that is like index 1. So whatever the element is present in the array index 1, that will be read into this variable, and that can be used in the inside the loop. Again, once the loop is done, so it again goes back and picks up the next index element, that is array index 2, right? So in the same way, like till the last index, so all the values of the elements will be can be read using this var variable, right? So this is like almost similar to having integer for simple for loop, like we initialize some index to 0 and we'll check some condition, right? And then we go and increment and decrement the operation, right? So this is very much equivalent to that, but if we wanted to read all the elements without knowing or without specifying any index, we can use the enhanced for loop. Till now, whatever we discussed is called as a single dimensional array, or it is also called as 1D array, one dimensional array, right? Now we are going to discuss about multi-dimensional array. So let's understand with an example. I have an array A which has elements some 1, 2, 3, 4, and I have another array with some values like this, and I have array C with some elements in it. Like this, we can have n number of arrays, right? Again, maintaining all these arrays will be difficult, right? So we need another array which can hold all these arrays. For example, like int, let me call my array as m, and it has to hold arrays of arrays. So this is the syntax of it. So we need to have square brackets 2 times, and then so we can have all these values inside it like this. So this is a 2-dimensional array which can hold the array objects. So you can see we can call this as an array of arrays. That is what we call it as a 2-dimensional array. So you can see it here. It is an array enclosed in curly braces, and within it, it has like arrays inside it. So array we know, single dimensional array, it has the elements, right? And within it, like we have different arrays. So this is what we call it as a 2-dimensional array. Now let me show you the declaration part of how to do the declaration for it, right? New int of same as single dimensional array. Only thing is we need to mention the how many arrays we wanted to store, and each array, so how many elements are present in it. So here you can see we have 3 arrays, so we can represent it using from top to bottom, we can represent it as rows, and from left to right we can represent it as these things as columns. We can call this as columns, just for our understanding, right? So you can see here this represents the rows and the second number represents the columns, right? This is called as like this thing is called as 2D array, 2-dimensional array, 2D array, right? This is the instantiation part, and how to initialize the values. So this can be like generic thing, but how to actually access these values, read these values. So m of, say for example, I wanted to access some 6 here. So how to access that? It is present in second row, right? Again, rows starts with the zeroth index here, right? 0, 1. So it is present in the 1. It is present in the second row actually, but the index is 1. So I have written 1 here, and then within 1. So now we are pointing this, within this array we are pointing this object, and within this object 6 is present at the third position, that is second index. 0, 1, 2 index starts with 0, right? So m of 1, 2 gives me the value of 6. This is how we can read the values from a two-dimensional array. Now when we have the rows and columns different, like each I have list of arrays, but each array has different number of elements in it. You can see here A has 3 elements, B has 4 elements, and C has 2 elements. So how to handle that? This array is called as a jagged array. So let me put it here. If we have different number of rows and columns in a two-dimensional array, then that we call it as a jagged array. And you can see the initialization part, right? So we can have in the curly braces, we can represent the arrays as is. This is fine. Now how to instantiate it? So we have 3 rows here, 3. So the first number represent rows. We can have 3 rows, fine, but how to represent this columns? So the maximum, what are the maximum number of columns for an array? So you can see it here. B has 4 elements, which is maximum. So you can write it as 4, or we can just leave that this square braces. So we don't need to mention that columns here. We can just leave it as is, as we are not sure how many elements each array has. But if we already know like the maximum number of array objects you are going to store, you can mention that number here. And the accessing reading the array from this jagged array is also same. Let's say for example I wanted to read this some 8 here. 8 is present in the which row? 1, 2, 3. So index starts with 0, 0, 1, 2. Second index. So second index m of 2, and within this it is present in the first index, like first element. So 0th index. m2 of 0 gives us the number element 8. So this is about the jagged array. So the only difference between the normal two-dimensional array and jagged array is it has the different number of rows and columns for the array objects. Everything else remains the same. So this is all about the multi-dimensional array. Like this we can have, so this we call it as two-dimensional array, and we can have even this set, right? This set two-dimensional array. If we have like many two-dimensional arrays, so that we can have it into another array called three-dimensional array. So like this we can have n-dimensional array. That's why we call it as a multi-dimensional array. So this is all about the arrays. Now let us see an example on whatever we discussed till now.
Let us create a new class. I'll name my class as single dimensional array. Single dimensional array. Take the main method, finish, and let me declare my array object. I'll take an integer data type as an example, and my array name is A, and followed by square braces, right? So this is how we declare an array. Or we can also declare it as specifying the square braces just before naming the variable, or even we can have this just before after specifying the data type as well. So all these are the valid syntaxes of declaring an array. Now let's see the instantiation part, how to instantiate an array. So we already declared an array. Now we wanted to reserve some elements in an array, like we declared an array to store some integer variables, right? So how many integer variables you wanted to have in your array, so that we are going to specify now. So say for example I wanted to store some 5 integer values into my array. So this is how we need to instantiate the array. So the meaning of this is we are asking JVM to reserve an array which can hold 5 integer values. So this is what the meaning of instantiation. So array can only hold 5 integer values with this instantiation, right? Now let's initialize this array, initialization part. So how to initialize the array? Array can be stored, elements in array can be stored and accessed using the indexes of the array. And the index starts with 0. So a of 0, I'm assigning some value, and a of 1, I'll assign some value. This is how we initialize the array elements. So I'm actually taking the array object A, and using the indexes, I'm going to store the elements into this array, right? This is how we initialize the array. I initialized like 5 elements in the array with some values, right? Now, let me actually display all these array elements on the console. For that, let me use the for loop, or let's display first one value. How do we display one value from the array is a of, say for example, I wanted to display first element a of 0, right? Let me execute this. Right click, run as Java application. You can see 10 got displayed as I wanted to display the first element in the array. So in the same way, I wanted to display all the elements in the array. So this 0 should be replaced with some variable. So for that, let's loop it. I'll write a simple for loop, which I'll take index as I, where my index starts with 0, and I less than what will be my last index. So the last index will be the index. So last index will be the size of the array minus 1. So as the index is starting with 0, it will definitely be the length minus 1, right? Like size of the array minus 1. And how do we get the size of the array? Using the data member of the array object, length. So a is the array here, and dot length is the data member of array. So with this we get the size of the array I++. And now we should just replace this 0 with I, as we are using I as the index, right? So this actually should display all the elements of the array on the console. Let's see that now. So you can see here all the elements of the array got displayed here. This we did it using the simple for loop, right? Now what if I don't initialize some of these values? So I thought I'll be having some uh, 5 integer values in my array, but it was like I used only 3 integer uh, variables, right, in the array, and the rest of the 2 I left it as is. So what happens if I try to print this element value? So let's see that now. So you can see the fourth and fifth, or the third and fourth index elements, we need to initialize values to it, but it is displaying 0. So with this we can understand that the default values for an array is 0. Say for example, I even comment this out. So we just instantiated the array, so only memory is allocated for the array elements. We didn't initialize any value into the array. Let's execute this now and verify. So you can see all zeros gets displayed, meaning all the elements of the array are by default initialized to 0. Next, we can actually have this part, right? Declaring, instantiating and initializing in single line. Like, let me comment this out and this as well. Int a equal to array a equal to, just if we can write like this in a single line. So this, the meaning of this is declaring, instantiating and initialization is taken care in single step. So we can achieve all these 3 in single step like this. And yeah, now let's execute and verify. So it is very much equivalent to all these 3 steps. So all these 3 steps we are able to achieve in single step. And you can see the output here. All the elements of the array got displayed on the console, right? Now let us see. Now see, I have like 5 elements in the array, right? I wanted, say for example, it's my index starts with 0 and it ends with my array dot length minus 1. So it is less than, so it will stop at length minus 1, right? What if I actually try to access more than the index? So you can see 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. there are like 4 indexes, but but a dot length gives us size as 5, right? So what if we try to access the index 5? A of 5 doesn't exist here, but I still try to access a of 5. So let's see now what happens. You can see we get an exception called array index out of bounds exception, and it is also specifying the index here. So the meaning of that is the index 5 doesn't exist, and this is the exception, meaning array is index is out of the bounds, is what the exception is saying us, meaning this index for the array doesn't exist is the meaning of this exception. So we should be careful that index should be in the range from 0 to array size minus 1. Otherwise, we'll get this array index out of bounds exception. Now, let's see about the enhanced for loop, right? So this is the simple for loop which we can use to display the elements of the array in the console. Now, let me show you how to write the enhanced for loop. For in element from array A. So sysout element. So the meaning of this is there is an array A, and from that read elements from array starting with index 0, read each element and store it in this variable element which is of type int. So this is what we need to specify. So we have an array and we wanted to read all the elements from the array starting with 0th index till the last index. So this is how we can represent that in enhanced for loop. And this element is not the index of the array. Just remember that this is the actual element, actual value of the array, right? So this is element, not the index. Now let's execute this. You can see all the values of the elements of the array got displayed here. So let me explain this again, the enhanced for loop. The meaning of this is we need to read it from right to left. So I have an array colon. From that array, I wanted to read each element from that array and store it into this element variable, which is of type integer, and it enters into the loop. And we can write our own logic here. I'm just printing this element on the console. And once the loop is done, it goes back and picks up the second element in the array automatically, and that is assigned to this element again. And once it enters the loop, so we can write our own logic here. Again, it goes back to the next iteration. In the next iteration, automatically the third element will be actually read by this element variable from the array. So it is like it starts with 0th index and till the last index in the array are iterated using this enhanced for loop. So it is like very much similar to this simple for loop, but we don't have the control on the index here in the enhanced for loop. It always starts with the 0th index and it goes on reads all the elements till the last index in the array. This is the only difference between simple for loop and enhanced for loop. And we use enhanced for loop when we wanted to read all the elements in the array. And we can see the advantage of array is we can access any element from the array using the indexes like a of 2, a of 3, like that. I can use the index of the array and get the value of element of array using the indexes, right? So, and the limitation of array is array size. It is it is of fixed size. So if you observe here, when we declare the array, right? So we declared a equal to new int of y, meaning it reserves only memory for to actually store 5 integer elements, right? So that can't be like automatically increased. So it is static, or we can say it as the size is fixed in array. So that's the limitation of array, and we are going to actually have a remedy for this limitation using collections, and that we'll discuss when we are going to discuss about the collections concept in the coming sessions. So this is all about single dimensional array. Let us create a new class. We'll name my class as multi-dimensional array. Let's start with declaring the array, multi-dimensional array. So I'll have my array name as yum followed by 2 square braces, right? Or we can also declare it as int, sorry. So the square braces can come before the variable name as well. or we can also have this as one square braces before the variable name and one after the variable name as well. Or we can specify the square braces immediately after the data type. So these are all the valid syntaxes of declaring a two-dimensional array. And what is a two-dimensional array is, it is used to store the array of arrays, right? So how to instantiate it? Instantiation of two-dimensional array, right? So we already declared array object M as a two-dimensional array. So we wanted to allocate memory for it. So say for example, I wanted to have 3 arrays to be stored, and each array will have 3 elements in it, 3 integer values in it, right? So in that case, we need to declare the two-dimensional array this way. So m equal to new integer of 3. First first number specifies the number of arrays, and the second number specifies the number of elements in each array. So this is the instantiation part. So memory will be allocated with this step. Now initialization part. So how to initialize the array? M of 0 of 0. Let's understand with this with an example. And here is an example. You can see the 3 rows and 3 columns here. So how do we initialize this array? M of 0 of 0, meaning 0th row and 0th column. So we represented this two-dimensional array using rows and columns. 3 rows which are read from top to bottom, and 3 columns which are read from left to right. You can see here. And even rows and columns are also, the index of rows and columns are also starting with 0. You can see it here. And now we wanted to initialize this two-dimensional array. How do we do that? So 0 of 0, like 0th row, 0th column. We wanted to assign some value like this. And 0th row, first column. You can just see this example, this table here. So 0th row, first column has 2 values. So in the same way, we can initialize all the other values as well. Let's do this in a single step. This declaration, instantiation, and initialization part. Let's do it in a single step. Like int equal to m, int m equal to, so 1. This is an array. M is a two-dimensional array which has 3 array objects in it. That is 1, 2, 3 is one array in it, and it has second array which has 4, 5, 6, and it has another third array which has values 7, 8, and 9. This is how we declare, instantiate, and initialize the values of a two-dimensional array. So you can see this M itself is an array which has the array objects in it, 3 array objects in it, and each array object within it has 3 elements in it. Now let us display all these elements on the console. For that, I'll take I as index and I less than 3, which is used to represent the number of rows. We have 3 rows, right? So as index starts with 0, I'm ending it with 2. So that's the reason I gave it as I less than 3. Now let me take another variable j, which represents the index for columns. We also have columns as 3, right? So I'm taking j less than 3. Now we'll display the values m of I, j. So I representing rows, and let me put it here. I represent rows and j representing the columns. Now let me execute this. You can see the output here, 1, 2, 3 till 9, right? But this is not in the format of this rows and columns. This is not in the format of this table, right? So how to get that? We just should not have println, as println prints each element in a new line. So I just removed that println method and using print, and we'll have some space after each element. And once we are done displaying all the columns for one row, then we need to leave one new line. before we go to the new row, right? So that is what we did. Now let me execute this. Now we can see the format, the same table format, like a row column format. We got it. So this is how we can read the two-dimensional array. This is all about having two-dimensional array with 3 rows and 3 columns, right? Or having equal number of rows and columns, right? So let me take a copy of it, comment this out, and for example, if I have 3 arrays, right? What if I have an equal number of elements in the arrays? Like I have in my two-dimensional array, so I have 3 rows or 3 array objects, but each array has different number of elements in it. So this is what we call it as a jagged array, right? So we have like array objects within the two-dimensional array, but each array object has different number of elements in it. And this is what we call it as a jagged array. And how to actually declare and instantiate the memory for this type of jagged array is, so let me take some as x. I'm just showing an example int. So we know that we have 3 array objects, right? So that we need to mention here, and we are not sure on the columns, so we just need to leave this as is, as this is uneven. So we are sure that we have 3 array objects, you can see it here, but we are not sure what is the number of elements each array can have. It's not the same for all the arrays, so we just leave this as is, like this. So this is how we allocate memory for the jagged array, right? For now, just let me comment this out, and now let's see how to display these jagged array elements on the console, right? Again, like when I say rows, it is about array objects, right? And when I talk about columns, it is about the elements within each array. So I index represents the rows or array objects, and till I less than j is my two-dimensional array, and dot length gives us the size of this 2D array. So it is 3, right? So here we'll get j dot length or size of the two-dimensional array as 3. So that we represented with rows. And next, j is the index we are using. Oh, we also have j here. So let's represent this with some d, and I'll have some d here. Right. So j equal to 0, j less than here, it has to iterate through all the elements of the current array object. So say for example, first index is this one, right? It points to the first array object. So it will be d of I. D of I represents the first object, right? In this two-dimensional jagged array. Now I wanted to loop all these elements within this array. So d of I dot length gives us the size of that array object, that specific array object, which we are calling it as columns, right? And we wanted to print this d of ij, that particular element. Let me execute this, and you can see here. So this is how we need to display the jagged array on the console. Like we just took 2 indexes, I to represent the rows and j to represent columns, that is elements of each array. Now we can have this same thing using the enhanced for loop as well. Like we can display all the elements of a two-dimensional array using enhanced for loop as well. So let's see that now. We have D, which is a two-dimensional array, and from this we can actually read the single dimensional array each time. So let me call that as A. And from each single dimensional array, I wanted to read element, right? One element, and print that on the console, right? The same thing we can actually copy here. Let me execute it. Oh, we have an error here. Okay, we don't need to mention the indexes here, as this is an enhanced for loop. You can see here the same output here, right? So enhanced for loop, what it does, from D, which is a two-dimensional array, I wanted to read each array that is represented with A, here, and from each A, I wanted to read all the elements from that array. Like for example, in this case, first it actually reads this array object, which is 1, 2, 3. So this A has 1, 2, 3, and from this 1, 1, 2, 3 array object, each element will be read, and that is displayed on the console, right? And next, once this is done, that array object is done. So then from this D, the array object will point to the second index, that is this 4, 5, 6, 7 object, and from that it will actually pick up all the elements and display, and so on. So this is how the enhanced for loop works, and this is all about two-dimensional array. So if we have like this this is a two-dimensional array, right? So if we have number of two-dimensional arrays, then we can have even three-dimensional array as well. So like that we can have n-dimensional array. That's the reason we call this as a multi-dimensional array. So this is all about the arrays. So that's all for this video. Thanks for watching.